My friends, here at verse 151 of chapter 6 of the Qur'an, the message really comes through very, very strongly and very clearly. And it is really simplified and brought down to brass tacks. You know, it's an interesting chapter, chapter 6, because it breaks away from a number of chapters that really are revealed in Medina. And so chapter 6, which is called the cattle or An'am, is located clearly in Mecca. So if you look at the content, if you read the content of this chapter 6, what you will notice is that it is completely devoid of religious rulings and interpersonal laws, and it really comes down to the core essence of the message. And just as a little bit of a background to the Meccan chapters in the Quran, that the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, he spent 13 years of his life in the city called Mecca. And from the age of, I think in his 40s, he received the mission, he assumed the mission of spreading the message, and the mission coincided with the verses of the Holy Quran, what the Quran refers to as the signs or the evidence. And so he starts reciting or rendering these verses or these pieces of evidence to his community, to his townsfolk in Mecca. But we know from the text of the Quran and from history, also corroborated history, that he had a very, very tough time in Mecca for those 13 years, and that the attitude generally was antagonistic towards him, and that he would really fight a losing battle in that city. It was apparently a city where there was a reasonably powerful elite that controlled the culture and the economy of that city. A powerful elite that was invested in the existing culture, the existing practices, the existing customs, the existing political order in that city. And so the powerful elite, the businessmen, the billionaires of that city, if one can call them that, they really had vested interests in people just continuing as they were. And the message, obviously, that the Prophet brings, and which I will summarize now, because here at verse 151 in that chapter, it comes down to the actual, what am I asking from you? It comes down to that. So these are really the things that are eternal, in fact. And so the chapter, much of what goes on in chapter 6 is reassurance to him, is reiterating some of the arguments. It's giving a glimpse of the future, because that's a duty of a prophet, is to offer people a glimpse of the future. And some of the core arguments or some of the core positions that are advanced in this chapter 6 are things like death is not the end. Like when you die on earth, it's not the final story, there's a continuation. Right? That's the one point that this chapter makes. The other point that this chapter makes is that you are to be held accountable for your actions on earth. So the idea of completely escaping any form of accountability, of answering for your deeds on earth, that is coupled with the idea that there is a life that continues after this life. Right? So the other thing that comes out in this chapter are, obviously, as I mentioned, many of the arguments that people come with. Like, for example, it will highlight an argument of people where they say that, look, if God wanted us to be good, why didn't he just create us good? That's like one of the arguments. And so the chapter will elaborate on that. Or the question, why don't God just make the world the way he wants it? and then it would be done. But for all those, this chapter offers explanations and answers, and I can just summarize it by saying that there is a more complex plan at work coming through from the works and from the words. And that plan is something to do with giving people an opportunity to redeem, giving people an opportunity to make amends. And so the will of God is not simply imposed, but people are offered abundant opportunity to reflect and to start thinking, to allow their minds to start reflecting. And I think that is another important point in this chapter, is that the human mind must learn to reflect. If you are not going to learn to reflect independently without acting, because there's acting and there's reflecting, and most people merely act. They are actors, they are not agents. And an actor is somebody that reacts to the reality, like a reptile or like a worm. You basically open your mouth and you eat whatever is there, and you run away from harm. And that is, the chapter is imploring us to stop being actors and to become reflectors, to start thinking. Then, of course, the chapter also dwells on the types of things that are harmful in this world. And I think that is what brings us to these verses. I'm going to share these verses with you, because this really brings it down to 10 items that the creator of the universe is enjoining on us. And these are the 10 items. At verse 151, it reads, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قل تعالوا أتل ما حرم ربكم عليكم ألا تشركوا به شيئا وبالوالدين إحسانا ولا تقتلوا أولادكم من إملاق نحن نرزقكم وإياهم ولا تقربوا الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن ولا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق ذلكم وصاكم به لعلكم تعقلون. So the Prophet is told, in this verse, he is told, tell them the following. And I can just imagine the Prophet convening one of his countless gatherings in Mecca, where he's trying to convince them to change their ways, to emancipate themselves from the elite, from the enslavement, from being actors and not players, from being actors and not thinkers. The verse instructs him here, tell them the following: come, gather, and let me render to you that which your Lord and Sustainer holds sacred for you. So now comes the key points that the Prophet is trying to share with them. Number one, that you co-opt nothing along with him as worthy of sacred devotion. So in other words, that you refrain from treating any other object or person or idea or book or legacy as worthy of sacred devotion except the one true God. Number two, that you show respect and kindness to both your parents. And that is also important. Number three, that you abort not your babies due to poverty. We will provide for them and for you. That's number three. Number four, that you stay away from sexual permissiveness privately and openly. Number five, that you do not kill any person whose life is made sacred by God unless it is righteously done. Such is the manifesto of God. And then in verse 152, the manifesto continues. Also, that you do not touch the wealth of a defenseless child, except to enhance it, until they come of age. Number 7, that you give full measure and weight, doing justice in all dealings. And we place on no person an unbearable burden. So there is a level of finite level of accuracy. Number 9, that's number 8, that when you speak, that it be with fairness, even if it goes against your loved ones. That when you speak, that it be with fairness, even if it goes against your loved ones. And then the real number 9, and that you fulfill the pledge of God. So there's 9 of them. Right? This is my work. I've just prepared the slide for you now. And that you fulfill the pledge of God. These are what He promulgates for you. Hopefully, you will take heart. And then the final closing point. This then is the straight path which you must follow. Follow not other paths, as those will lead you away from His way. Such then does He prescribe to you, in order that you will become a considerate people. Now, isn't it amazing how some of these points are so relevant? I think all of them. Is there any point that is not relevant here? And keep in mind that this is a book, the oldest copy of which we have is 1,300 years old, the Birmingham manuscript. This is text that is ancient. This is not text that I've composed yesterday. I've just added an English rendition for you. But this is ancient words, before colonialism, before the English, before the, all empires that came in between. There were these words. And can any one of you give me any of these 9 points that is irrelevant or unnecessary? Go through it and you tell me. And so this, in very simple terms, is what the holy ancient script, the ancient revelation, is calling for. And this is what we who are upholders of this ancient revelation, what we who uphold these words, what we call our friends, our family, and our fellow human beings too. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.